Dear Judd, this old Christmas carol isn't as well known or often sung as others that are so familiar, but the homely grace of the carol's first line appeals strongly to me, and it expresses a sentiment that I didn't feel until late on the day before Christmas in 1944. That Christmas Eve began as a dull gray day in Republic. The sky was battleship-colored, and even the snow covering our yard was dingy, tainted by soot that fell from the coal smoke billowing from chimneys along Elm Street. I felt melancholy, due mostly to the war news. The feeling was intensified by the drab scene outside when I looked out our dining room window. It seemed that we wouldn't be having our usual joyous family gathering. Things were going to be different this year. Bob was outside on some errand. Patty was in the kitchen helping Isabel prepare some desserts for our Christmas dinner. Phyllis, who had joined the U.S. Navy Nurse Corps, was in Springfield, working at St. John's Hospital while awaiting her orders to report to the Naval Hospital at Great Lakes, Illinois. That's where, in only a few months, she would meet George, who had been injured when his Navy bi-wing Stearman training aircraft crashed. Jean and baby Anne had come home to stay with us for a few months. She and Malcolm had been married shortly before he was sent to Britain to take part in the D-Day landings at Normandy. Now Malk was a second lieutenant with the U.S. Army Medical Corps and was leading an ambulance company somewhere in Belgium, although we didn't know that yet. Malk would miss the next month's celebration of his daughter Anne's first birthday. The morning's radio news had carried reports of the fighting in the Ardennes region in France and Belgium. During the past week, the German army's surprise offensive had broken through the American lines. We worried that Malk's unit might be involved in the fighting, which the newscasters were calling the Battle of the Bulge. If we had known how close he was to the snowy, forested area where the German counterattack began, we'd have worried even more. I wandered into the living room and turned on the radio by your green chair. One of the stations was broadcasting a program of carols, and as I listened to There's a Song in the Air, There's a Star in the Sky, I thought of the Christmas pageant at Hood Methodist Church several years earlier. Our Sunday school class sang that carol and Silent Night as well. After we performed, there was a commotion in the back of the church, and Sam Hawk, dressed as Santa Claus, came down the aisle handing out big mesh bags full of oranges, ribbon candy, English walnuts, and gigantic candy canes. I was at that awkward stage of still wanting to believe in Santa, but wondering about the rumors I'd heard. And even though I knew this elf was Sam, I was still awed, because those magical bags of fruit and candy, his bushy beard, and the red and white costume all seemed to carry the full authority of Santa. By 5 o'clock, the winter sky was darkening, and I decided to walk downtown to help you close your office. You'd been keeping especially long hours for the past 3 years. The war touched everyone, even people who lived in a small town in the Missouri Ozarks. It was cozy inside the old depot office as I stood by the warm stove and watched you wind things up for the evening. The Western Union telegraph receivers had been clattering, and you'd typed several telegraph messages. Outside, the snow was starting again. You shoved the telegrams into your overcoat pocket and asked if I wanted to help deliver them. I did, and I bundled into my Mackinaw and galoshes while you banked the coals in the potbelly stove. As you locked the door of the inner office, I stood in the dark waiting room. I looked out one of the windows and could see the bright parallel lines of the main line tracks against the snow. We left the depot and crunched across the snowy gravel toward the downtown district. Warm lights from the store windows reflected on the wet sidewalks as we walked through town. A cardboard Santa Claus face beamed at us from the bourbon display inside Juggy's place. In the back of the liquor store, I saw Juggy Snyder just standing there, probably wanting to close up, but hoping to make one more Christmas Eve sale. It was snowing heavily by the time we walked away from the lights of the business district and entered the residential blocks of North Main Street. I watched snowflakes falling through the glow from a streetlight, and when you stopped to deliver the first of the telegrams, I stood on the sidewalk and waited. Over the past several years, you'd had to deliver a number of telegrams that began with, "We regret to inform you." Isabel told us once that she could tell by the look on your face when you'd had to make one of those deliveries. But tonight, these were Christmas messages, happy telegrams you didn't mind delivering. And as I waited in the snow and stillness of the night, I began to feel some of the old magic of Christmas Eve. We walked quietly along a side street to the next home, and then headed back to Elm Street, where you delivered the last telegram. Neither of us said anything as we walked toward home. I listened to the squiffing sound my galoshes made in the snow, and I felt the wet, cold touch of snowflakes against my face. We reached the lot adjacent to our house, and you said, "Look at that! Isabel's got the whole place looking like an ornament." I'd never seen our house look the way it looked that night. Every light inside was blazing. The Christmas tree was shining in the living room window, and the porch light cast a glow across the rippled, snowy surface of the front yard. Isabel and Pat had been busy baking, and that fragrance seemed to warm the cold night air. When I took off my galoshes and left them on the porch, I left the dreariness I'd felt earlier outside, too. Just before bedtime, some carolers came, and we stood on the porch, listening to "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," "O Little Town of Bethlehem," and "We Three Kings." We applauded the carolers, and they moved across the snow to the Cantrell's house, and then to the Fugits. Isabel said we'd all get chilled, so the rest of you went inside. But I stayed on the porch, breathing the cold, pure air. The carolers were far down the street, and I could hear them faintly singing, "There's a song in the air." I stood there shivering, listening to them until their voices were too faint to hear, because it was Christmas Eve, and I didn't want the wonder of it to end.